Hello, my name is Owen. Today I'll be doing a quick review of George R.R. Martin's A Feast for Crows. What I want to do is just give a brief overview about the book and then tell you things that I liked and disliked about it. Jumping straight into it, this is the fourth book of A Song of Ice and Fire, the Game of Thrones book series. I have watched the series in its totality, and I'm reading the books for the first time. This book was unique compared to the other ones. And I had somebody in the comments of my last video kind of warning me about the structure of this book, and that particular commenter didn't enjoy it. And it was different because unlike the other books, which had the POV characters across the board that we know and love, this book and the next book of Dance with Dragons is one book split in half. George R.R. Martin says as much, unlike the closing words of this book. He said that it was taking him too long, it was too big of a book with all the POVs, so he decided he's going to cut it in half. So in this book, there is no Jon Snow, there's no Tyrion Lannister, there's no Daenerys Targaryen. The main characters of Game of Thrones, if you watch the TV show, they're not in this book. They have no POVs. I mean, Jon Snow's in the very, very beginning, but they're not in this book. They don't have any POVs. It's not about them. It's more centered around like King's Landing, like Jaime Lannister, Cersei, Sansa, a little bit of Arya. No, there's a decent bit of Arya. She goes to Braavos and she begins her weird adventures with like the faceless, or I don't know what they're, not the faceless men, whatever. Her assassin training I know from the show. But honestly, not too much of her compared to previously. A lot of Brienne. But it was unique, and the commenter, like I said, didn't particularly enjoy that because obviously Daenerys and Tyrion and Jon are some of the strongest characters in this series. So it was definitely weird for me to read an entire Game of Thrones book without them in it, especially since they were the driving factor or driving characters for like the last couple stories. But honestly, I didn't mind it, particularly because the POVs in this book are so strong. I do think this is the weakest book of the series so far. I will say as much as that. And that's just because there are not POVs that are like boring. I was never bored reading this book, but there are just some that just felt like it wasn't really going anywhere. Particularly Brienne's. I really liked her little adventure with Sir Hyle and like Podrick and stuff like that. Like that was not in the show at all, and I really, really liked that compared to her journey in the show where she kind of like meets the Hound and like fights the Hound over Arya. I actually really liked their side adventure, but there was parts where I'm like, okay, what is this furthering? Because I know she's looking for the Stark girls, and I know where they're at, but it's just constantly like, where are the Stark girls? Are you the Stark girl? Are you the Stark girl in disguise? It's like, I know that that's not the case. So it's just a lot of that, which is kind of slow. Some of the stuff with Cersei, I felt dragged a little bit. It picked up at the end, but it was just a lot of like, I don't know. I thought her POV was interesting, especially because like to be in the mind of a villain. Well, first of all, the Lannister family is like the most interesting family to like psychoanalyze. They're all messed up in such unique ways, and it's so fascinating to get a pick of their brain because it's just really funny to me, and I feel like the show didn't hit on this as much as the book does, but how much of an idiot that Cersei is, it's actually hilarious. Like she makes like the worst decisions ever. Like she goes to the High Sparrow and says, yeah, you guys could have an army again. And then she like, in her brain, she's like, I'm as smart as my father. My father could never have done this. I'm Tywin reborn. And then everyone else POV, they're like, did she really just do that? Did she really just like start up the most dangerous thing, the most dangerous threat the kingdom faced that had to be like outlawed because it was like going to tear the whole Seven Kingdoms apart? She really just brought that back for no reason? And it's like, yeah, she did. And she's like, I'm so smart, but she's actually an idiot. I thought that was really funny. But it did get a little old that she like doesn't actually make any good decisions. I guess that's part of the point. But there was a quote, I forget which character said it, but it's like, I knew that Cersei would ruin the kingdom, but I didn't think it would happen this quick. It's like, true. It hasn't made a single good decision. But the part where she gets like her comeuppance and gets arrested, very satisfying for me because she was asking for it big time, big time. As I said in the last book, Jaime Lannister, one of my favorite characters. His POV was super interesting because this one, it's still his struggle with being like recovering his honor and like his self-image, but like the self battles this man has to go through, because it's just, it's an interesting look at redemption, if how hard it is for someone to redeem themselves, because it's not only like your own view of yourself and how you want to proceed, because everybody treats him like how he was before, like he's the Kingslayer. He has no honor. He's going to do the scummiest things, and he's always going to be selfish. He's always going to betray you. And you could see, like, in the text, like, they treat Jaime like he's going to do that. And even though you know, as a reader, that he's trying to be better, he regresses because, like, he gets so mad that, like, people treat him as different. He's like, all right, well, screw you. Maybe I will be dishonorable. Maybe I will be the Kingslayer. And it's just like, it's like, no. But you, like, see, like, it's hard for him, like, when he, like, talks with the Blackfish, and, like, he just, like, in his eyes, he looks at him the way Ned Stark looked at him when he was singing the Iron Throne. It's like, you don't know everything about me, so, like, why are you judging me? And I feel bad for him. And also, I really like the running trend of Tyrion's last quote, where he's like, Cersei's been effing Moon Boy and the Kettle Blacks. And, like, for, like, the first, like, 3/4 of the book, almost every other sentence of Jaime's POV is, like, that quote in italics. So he just, like, can't get it out of his mind. Like, every time he sees his sister, the quote's just running through his head. It shows, like, how much of a toxic relationship he had with Cersei, and, like, you learn that, like, it wasn't like, oh, these two schemer twins. It was he was basically Cersei's lapdog for his entire life, and he's getting to the point where, like, they just hate each other. And, like, this whole book, Cersei and Jaime were not on the same page, because Jaime was just a different person when they came back, and Cersei knew that, but he's still, like, obsessed with her, and they're both obsessed with each other in twisted ways, and they're trying to, like, manipulate each other. Very, very interesting character work in this book, especially. I feel like it might be the strongest in terms of, like, diving deep into the psyche, because another thing I thought was interesting, and this is kind of all over the place, but another thing I thought was interesting with this book was how it played with the perception of characters from other characters' POVs, particularly because a lot of the characters weren't in them, but I'm talking specifically about Tyrion and the Hound. Like, they get talked about a lot in this book. Tyrion, because obviously at the end of the last book, he killed Tywin, he escaped from prison, he's gone. So everybody's talking about him, and it's like the imp. The imp is like, he's like crawling in the wall, like he's a demon. And, like, obviously we know who Tyrion is, and, like, we know he, like, has a good heart. He's just trying to do everything right. But it's just like, obviously Cersei hates him, so he paints him out as to be this horrible monster that's lurking in the shadows trying to get at her. Like, she just doesn't understand, like, what his motivations ever were. But it was even more interesting with the Hound, like, how everybody talks about him, and they thought it was the Hound that was, like, burning villages and, like, leading an army, and the whole thing was like, we got to kill the Hound. Like, it's Sandor Clegane, and Jaime's like, I can't fight Sandor, but, like, we got to stop him. But we know that, like, Sandor was just taking Arya, and then he got wounded, and now, like, supposedly he's dead, which I'm like, he found his corpse. Like, I was surprised at that. Hopefully it's not true, but I don't really know how that one priest got confused. He said he found him with a fever and he buried him, which is true. That's where we last saw him. Hopefully he's not dead. But they also said they killed the Onion Knight. They said that, oh, they chopped off his head and hands. I don't believe it. Not for a second. Not my Onion Knight. He'll last forever. But I thought it was interesting, like, because the way that they talk about the Hound is that he's, like, the worst. Like, it's like, oh, classic Clegane. But, like, and it just makes sense for those characters to think about him this way. But the author never says, like, but remember, he's actually good, because, like, those characters wouldn't be thinking that. And I think it's kind of obvious when I say it out loud, but I just think it's interesting that Martin doesn't hold your hand in that way. He's like, you should remember how he really is. So this whole book, I'm just going to trash the characters that you know and love the entire time, because these characters are trashing them in their heads, and I think it's super interesting. But the main thing I want to talk about in this book, that I realized, Sansa is a major POV character, and after reading this book, I realized how much of a butchery the show was to Sansa Stark's character. It was actually mind-blowing to me. Well, I just want to say, first of all, like, this book is by far the biggest turn from the show. Like, I always thought that, oh, the show followed the books very, very closely until the books ended, then it, like, went off on its own. Like, we're going to make it up from here on. But really, like, they went off the rails a lot sooner. Like, the Dorne plot, like, I knew that some Dorne stuff left out, but honestly, that's another thing I was kind of bored with, though. Like, because after, like, their plot to, like, put Marcella on the throne kind of went sideways, I was bored with that. It's kind of just boring chapters. Anyway, but that was not in the show, obviously. And then Sansa's whole story is completely different. because I knew she went to, maybe I'm forgetting stuff from the show, but she goes to Littlefinger and she like becomes like his ward, but she gets a new name and a new persona. I don't remember any of this, and like she's still like with Littlefinger at the end. Like she doesn't go to the Boltons and does weird stuff there, and obviously like has a horrible time because Ramsay's like the worst, but he's like not even in this book. He's probably in the next book. I don't know. Anyway, I'm getting distracted. But the difference between book Sansa and show Sansa is like night and day, because this is the book where Sansa comes into her own as a badass character. And it's very interesting comparing her to Arya, because from the very beginning, Arya was the adventurous one, the one who's like has more masculine like hobbies. Like she wants to sword fight, she wants to be an adventurer, she wants to be a knight, and Sansa's like, I just want to be a lady, right? So that's the dichotomy there. But the first couple books, like Sansa's just like basically a prisoner in the worst scenario of all time, and she's just like being manipulated or just being like trapped with Joffrey or with Cersei and just having a horrible time. So honestly, in the first couple books and like in the show, she makes decisions that are questionable because she's just a kid in a horrible situation. So like you're like, okay, like why did she betray Ned in the beginning, stuff like that, because she's just a kid. But in the show, she never really gets over that. She's because like the worst situations to worst situations to worst situations, and then all of a sudden she's like, okay, this is the part where she's cool, and they just made her like basically Cersei, but like doesn't kill people indiscriminately. So she's just like cold, like I am the queen of the north or whatever, like she says, and like she's like cold and not compassionate, and that's like the way that the writers thought would be to make her a strong female character. They almost made her more similar to Arya in terms of like ruthlessness. Like I'm gonna kill you if you get in my way. That's their idea of like a strong character. But the books are actually very interesting because of how her relationship developed and how her dynamic developed with Robin. Robin, right? The Aaron kid. So like, yeah, she calls him Sweet Robin. Anyway, so she really like becomes like a mother figure to like this sickly boy. And I thought her scenes with him were very interesting because obviously this is another scenario where she's basically a prisoner, right? All her family is missing or dead, and Littlefinger is obviously very creepy and like wants to marry her, but also like likes to cosplay as her father. Very strange relationship going there. Littlefinger is probably top 10 creepiest men in the universe. But anyway, so she's in the scenario, and like Robin like lost from his mother, so he's like very like, and he's like a sick child, like he's having like a bad time of it. He's like very needy, but like Sansa is able to like use her like motherly instincts, but also like her lady, like she like perfectly manipulates him to like get him to do what he needs to do, like for his own safety, or like because there's a scene where they have to get down from like the castle before the winter comes, and like the dialogue is so interesting because she knows exactly how to manipulate him, and like it's like, oh, like you're so brave, like I could never be brave as that, and like it sounds like small, but that's the way that her character is badass in a way that's different from the fighters and stuff like that. And you could really see in this moment that if she was like a queen or if she was like a noble woman, she would be just as efficient at running a kingdom than like a Jon Snow who like has the sword and is like a strong, you know what I mean? Like it's a way of manipulating people, but not in like a malicious way. Like it's just the other side of the coin. Like it's like I don't really know exactly how to display it, but it's the opposite of, to be a good, strong woman character, you got to be cold and compassionate and ruthless. It's no, I know what people want and people want to hear, and I could use that by being like courteous and stuff like that in order to get them to do what I need them to do, and that way everyone's happy. And it's a very, very unique mindset that isn't in Game of Thrones otherwise. So to be in her perspective and for her to like never make a mistake. And that was another interesting thing. Like she never like says the wrong thing in this book to Robin and he like freaks out. Like she's very, very good at it. And I think that was a very interesting decision, that you realize that she is very good at being this more motherly role, but there's also just being like this lady role. And she's like talking with the other noble ladies and stuff like that. Like obviously she's still in a rough situation with Littlefinger, but this is a way more interesting Sansa than the show Sansa, because I always thought it was like, at the end of the show, they're like, she's the smartest one I've ever met. This character in the books, I completely agree that you can make a case that Sansa is very, very intelligent, but the cold, like Dany comes to Winterfell in the show, and she's like, I don't trust you. How are you going to feed all these dragons? Like, I'm going to kill you because you're another ruler coming into my territory. Not this Sansa. This Sansa would never. This Sansa would be courteous and find a way to like shift the situation so everyone thinks that they're winning and nobody like suffers for it. So that was kind of a tangent, but I think it's a shame. Another, add to the shame pile of why the shows really just fumbled the bag. Because also like people always say Lady Stoneheart, and Lady Stoneheart is in this book a little bit. But like honestly not enough, so like I could see why they cut it out, because they could just be like weird to have that actress back as like a zombie character that doesn't speak any words. Like maybe I can understand cutting that out, but like cutting out like Sansa's main skill set and just making her like basically the trauma bag where like the worst thing happens to this character, and then like she's strong now because she never loves again. It's like, no, Sansa is the one who like loves and wants to trust people. And sometimes it can work out, which I think is a wholesome message in such a horrible world that is Westeros. But yeah, so I plan on jumping in Dance with Dragons soon, just to finish that up and be caught up, and probably never read Game of Thrones again because no more books will come out. But yeah, I'll keep you updated on that. And thanks for sticking around for 16 and a half minutes. Bye.